Namaste. Today's subject is simplicity. I'm going to start with a bit of an odd story, and then I hope that it will connect to the subject. So some of you know this story, but there was a saint who lived in the foothills, and he was challenged. There was a saint who lived in the foothills near a village, and one day he was walking by the village, and some young boys were there, and this saint was different. He was, to those boys, he was odd. And they decided to, do what they thought was fun. They decided to throw rocks at the saint. So they started throwing rocks at this man. And some hours later, the brothers of the saint, who had been looking for him because he hadn't returned to the ashram, they found him on the side of the trail, bloody and on the ground. And they reached down to him and they said, "What's happened? What happened to you?" And the saint looked up and smiled sweetly and said, "I was playing with the boys." Right. How could you have that attitude in life? How could you think, well, I was playing with the boys when the boys were clearly being mean and hurtful? And the saint's attitude was tied to one of the key understandings that makes the difference between a devotee and a worldly person. And the reason that this person was a saint and not just a saint in the making, because what we say is, Master said, a saint is a sinner who never gave up. So those boys will become saints, even though they did this mean act, eventually. But the distance from selfishness, from hurtfulness to saintliness, this is a huge gap. But it's a simple difference. The difference between living through the ego, living in ways that lead to unhappiness, and living in the soul, living in ways that lead to happiness. It's really that simple. Every choice that we make in life goes one way or the other. There is no middle ground. You could say, well, this will make you a little bit happier, but there's a very simple delineation. Some things lead to happiness, some things lead to unhappiness. And so from that simple understanding about how can we live making that choice, recognizing those times in life of, okay, in this situation, how do I choose happiness? How can I approach my life from this most simple point of view? I mean, we talk about simplicity and it means have less stuff. But why does having less things make us happier? So I'm going to be reading some quotes of masters and then talking a little bit about them in relationship to this simple circumstance, simplicity. Simplicity in life is making a choice that leads to inner connection and happiness, to the source of all well-being, or choosing those things which cause us to be less happy, to suffer. Live quietly in the moment and see the beauty of all before you. The future will take care of itself. So many people live worried about the future. All the time they're thinking, what can go wrong? Master said that the conscious mind is problem-oriented. The superconscious mind is solution-oriented. the number one solution to all life challenges is communion with God. You say, well, you can't, if the kids are throwing rocks at me and I'm starting to bleed, how is a meditation room going to help me? Because if you've spent your time in a meditation room, your response won't be one of fear, anger, pain, and suffering. It will be, we were playing. It's a huge recognition that freedom comes in the form of an inner well-being that is untouched by the discomforts, the outward discomforts of life. We live in the fear of losing so many things. We live in the fear of even losing our happiness. And all of those negative approaches to life lead to unhappiness. They're self-fulfilling. Be as simple as you can be. You will be astonished to see how uncomplicated and happy your life can become. Now, to the householder, this just seems like, well, nice platitude, oh, of course, yes. Especially if you're a monk or a nun living in the forest, life's easy. Have you ever read any of the stories? I'm saying this sarcastically. But remember the stories from the Indian tradition? Those guys out in the forest were always having problems. There was always something going wrong. They didn't live happily just because they were in the forest. Yes, the forest has many advantages, but it's not the location itself. There's no location on earth that will free you from the ups and downs of life unless that's going on inside. And I can tell you that every member of Ananda who has lived in the village, which is, if you go there, you feel like you just arrived in Satya Yuga. It's such a beautiful place. No one is untouched by challenge. But a conscious choice has been made to simplify, to get rid of all of the unnecessary things that keep us from feeling that inner connection to spirit. You must not let your life run in the ordinary way. Do something that nobody else has done. Something that will dazzle the world. Show that God's creative principle works in you. Now, this is an incredible call, an incredible challenge. And the easiest way to read this is, you've got to be Einstein, you've got to be Leonardo da Vinci, you've got to be some other incredibly great, and you're going, it's not looking good. How am I going to do this? But each and every one of us has an opportunity to be the greatest you. What does it mean to be great? This saint that I mentioned, he was walking in the forest. He wasn't speaking to the multitudes. He wasn't great because he had a huge world mission. He was great because he had changed himself. This is the number one source of greatness, the transformation of self. From complexity and suffering, belief that the world outside is the only reality, and it decides whether you can be happy or not according to whether you get things that you like or don't like, or whether you connect to that unshakable power of happiness within. This is the simple choice. Forget the past, for it is gone from your domain. Forget the future, for it's beyond your reach. Control the present. Live supremely well now. This is the way of the wise. So many people live, oh, I'm going to be happy when I make this much more money. I'm going to be happy when I get this promotion. I'm going to get happy when I get this or that or this or that or this or that. Or, oh, I'm so sad, such and such happened to me. That story that about a master who was talking to a woman. She was talking about how this terrible operation that she'd been through. And he says, oh, well, when did this happen to you? She's like, 20 years ago. So many people caught up on, because this bad day happened, week, month, or year, the whole rest of their life is ruined because they dwell on it, because they attach themselves to it, and they're the creators of their own unhappiness. The power of unfulfilled desires is the root of all man's slavery. We are slaves to our desires. Literally, they have us chained. And we cannot free ourselves, we cannot experience soul freedom until we conquer, we break those chains. How do we break those chains? You don't have to fight the chain itself. Well, let me, maybe I should, because there was a great answer here to that. Where is it? Well, we're going to get to the answer to that. I'll leave you in suspense. It is not your passing thoughts or brilliant ideas so much as your plain, everyday habits that control your life. Live simply. Don't get caught in the machine of the world. It is too exacting. By the time you get what you were seeking, your nerves are gone. Your heart is damaged, and the bones are aching. Resolve to develop your spiritual powers more earnestly from now on. Learn the art of right living. If you have joy, you have everything. So learn to be glad and contented. Have happiness now. This is it, the choice. Sri Teshwar said, live comfortably within your budget. This could be expanded to say, be happy with what you have. Be thankful. I mean, if we were starving on the streets, that would be a much more difficult thing to convince people of, but we're not starving. We have incredible bounty. And yet we oftentimes will experience more discomfort concerning the things that we don't have than poor people do. Because unfortunately, many poor people don't aspire to more. They feel defeated. But we don't feel defeated. We believe that we can get more. So we go after it. And the ability to get more is an essential component to spiritual success. But that ability needs to be directed towards inner happiness and not just outward success. That's the key. It's not that we shouldn't strive to do our jobs well, but we should do them well to please God, to serve God. Because this is the dharma that God's given us, not so that we can always want more material things. Always think that if I get more, I'll have more happiness. You do not have to struggle to reach God. This was the one I was trying to find. But you do have to struggle to tear away the self-created veil that hides him from you. We have to tear away the veil. Where is God? By definition, God's right here. God's everywhere. Why don't we see God, perceive God? Because there's a veil in front of our consciousness. That veil is the belief in the hypnotism that we are a physical body and that our senses and brain are the mechanisms and the only mechanisms through which we perceive. And that things outside of ourselves will give us happiness as they come through that mechanism. But the truth is that joy is already within us and all around us, behind the veil. And the whole yogic path is simply cut through the veil. Get through that distance, that seeming gap, which doesn't exist except that we've accepted it. So long as we believe in our heart of hearts that our capacity is limited and we grow anxious and unhappy, we are lacking in faith. One who truly trusts in God has no right to be anxious about anything. Now the thing is that in the beginning we want to believe in God because what choice do we have? That God is the only escape valve. Otherwise the world is a terrible place unless you're rich on top of the world. But for most people it's a never-ending challenge. So it's difficult to truly trust God in the beginning. And this is the difference between the yogic path and most religions. Most religions will tell you, well, you just have to have faith. But yogis say, no, you have to have experience. When you've experienced the joy of God's presence, then you can begin to trust it. And the more you experience it, the more you will naturally trust it. So trust in God is the inevitable and natural result of spending time inwardly connected. And from that is where true faith is built. And this saint who was responded to the outward bruises with bliss, he didn't need to think, oh yeah, I need to trust in God. No, it was the way that he had been living. And so we have to learn to live in that way. And one of the ways that we do that is to simply look at our lives and say, if I don't need it, let me get rid of it. If I don't absolutely need it, when you go window shopping, say, do I really need this? Oh, hey, it's beautiful. Enjoy it. Enjoy the fact that somebody might buy it. But you don't need to buy it. If we had to, well, this is a terrible truth, is every time we really desire something, we do have to get it. But not necessarily in this lifetime. And this is what keeps us going. This is what he's saying. It's these desires are what keep us coming back. And it's the desire for things that we want and the desire to avoid the things that we don't want. Both of those. Retire to the center of your being, which is calmness. This is, God is simple. Everything else is complex. Do not seek absolute values in the relative world of nature. We say, well, God is nature, and we say God is beauty. But God is also terrible cataclysm. Everything outside of ourselves is in flux. The only place that's not in the flux of pleasure and pain is the ever new nature of joy within. That's not flux, that's flow. That's the positive flow. That's an ever new joy. It's not boring. It's not like, oh, I got the joy and it was nice for a while, but then it kind of got old because it was the same old joy. It's not like that at all. Luther Burbank was a very well-known 20th century scientist in America who learned to commune with the plants, and through that communion, he convinced the cactus to give up the thorns. And he became quite famous for that and other successes that he had working with plants. The master wrote, and if you remember, Autobiography of a Yogi was dedicated to him, Luther Burbank, an American saint. His heart was, and when at his passing, Master said, his heart was fathomlessly deep, long acquainted with humility, patience, sacrifice. His little home amid the roses was austerely simple. He knew the worthlessness of luxury, the joy of a few possessions. The modesty with which he wore his scientific fame repeatedly reminded me of the trees that bend low with the burden of ripening fruits. It is the barren tree that lifts its head high on an empty boast. Every day, try to help uplift physically, mentally, or spiritually suffering people as you would help yourself or your family. If, instead of living in the misery-making, selfish way, you live according to the laws of God, then no matter what small part you may be playing on the stage of life, you will know that you have been playing your part correctly, as directed by the stage manager of all our destinies. Your part, however small, is just as important as the biggest parts in contributing to the success of the drama of souls on the stage of life. Make a little money and be satisfied with it by living a simple life and expressing your ideals rather than make a lot of money and have worries without end. If you don't invite God to be your summer guest, He won't come in the winter of your life. Many ask, shall I first acquire material success to fulfill our worldly obligations and then seek God? Or should we have God first and then go after success? By all means, God first. Never begin or end your day without communing with Him in deep meditation. We should remember that we cannot perform any duties without the power borrowed from God. So it is to Him we owe our first allegiance. If you do your other duties but forget God, He doesn't like that. The ideal is to perform all duties with the sole desire to please God. No matter what we're doing. When you're serving the children, yes, you're serving the children, but who are they? They're expressions of God. So you're serving God in the children. If you see only, oh, this is my child, I must serve this child, it's a very limiting point of view. And that extends to every person that you meet is a child of God. When we talk about service, it's not just feeding the poor food. It's feeding people that you meet all day long with peace, with a smile, with a sense of friendship rather than competition. When we relate to people in life like that, it's a very different story than if we see everybody as a problem. Plain living and high thinking should be your goal. Learn to carry all the conditions of happiness within yourself by meditating and attuning your consciousness to the ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new joy, which is God. Your happiness should never be subject to any outside influence. Whatever your environment is, don't allow your inner peace to be touched by it. It's simple. I didn't say easy, but it's simple. We have to dedicate ourselves to this. We have to say, okay, each and every day is a new day, a new challenge. So when you wake up in the morning and say, okay, Lord, What are we going to do today? And then no matter what it is, at the end of the day, you should be able to say, oh, we were playing. We were having fun. It doesn't matter what happened. I was playing with life. We had a good time. That's the simple path to God. Namaste.